we've got Richard on the line here. Hey, Richard, you are live on the
Oh,
line with
no.
Promise and Paul. How are you today?
I am phenomenal. Number one, all in, huge fan. Promise. What I've heard from you sounds fantastic. I will
Thank
be
you.
very
Thank
prompt.
you. What
Yeah,
was that?
I will attempt to be as prompt as possible.
Very good.
All good.
So, as simply as possible, I believe that it is consequently very wise to believe in God, at least some deist perspective. It's only because I think there are great arguments for mind body dualism. And I think that generally speaking, the universe has a great amount of, like, say Spinoza's God, for example, there's a great amount of ways that you can look at the universe where you find a lot of orderliness that would be atypical of what you would think of like a universe that was made by non divine methods. Does that make any sense?
Not
To
quite,
be
because
clear,
yeah, go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Paul.
Well, I just wanted to make sure, to be clear, you're advocating that it's true, not that it's has utility, right? Because I'm not as interested in the
Well,
utility arguments. You're arguing that it is true, not
okay. When
just
I
that
was
it's
originally
useful.
asked to give a reason to believe, I was
Yeah.
originally told that I was supposed to, I asked to say it is wise to believe in God. That was what I originally posited.
I
I
mean,
still will happily
Promise
talk
might be
about the
interested
idea that
in the
God,
utility. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I'm more concerned
go on.
if you
I'm
think
sorry.
it's true or not. Do you think it's do you think a
Yeah,
God exists?
I do think that a God exists. Yes. In fact, I kind of think three do. I am Roman Catholic.
Okay,
Okay.
cool. I'd love to hear why you think those gods exist.
Well, I was just being coy. It is only one God. But even so, the reason why I personally am convinced by God is because I find the idea of, church tradition being passed down and offering these innumerable, pretty reasonable testimonies about Jesus and his teachings to be more plausible than the idea that he was a fiction of some kind.
Do you think those are the only two choices?
I would imagine that there's only two choices, one that he is God, one that he is not. Can't imagine how there's anything besides a
Oh,
binary.
okay. But that's not how you framed it, right? You framed it as all the testimonies are true, or he was a fictional person.
Oh,
That was the
sure. I
dichotomy
guess I was
you
just
were
trying
setting up.
to I didn't mean to set up the dichotomy as though it is either that everything is true or nothing is true. I mean, there are certainly, I've watched a lot of your videos about how some testimonies are particularly dubious, especially regarding the apostles and their martyrdom.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad you've listened. Do you think that would you agree that sorry, it sounds like you're saying that testimony is the major reason that you believe. Before we go down that path, is
Well,
that an accurate statement?
I would say testimony and also church tradition. And I understand that this might not necessarily, it's just bordering on an argument from authority, but I do believe there is some level of grandiosity, some reverence that you should hold to the fact that it's existed so long.
Do you think that there's a distinction, a meaningful distinction between testimony and church tradition?
Well, yes, I would imagine that there was plenty of testimonies that certainly are not verified by church
Sorry, let me
tradition.
ask let me ask this. Do you think that church tradition is a subset of testimony?
I think that there are testimonies that are only around because of church tradition. I think that there are testimonies that are also around that are
Do
in
you
spite
think
of church tradition. I think church
is
tradition is
church
its own
tradition
separate entity.
anything other than testimony?
Yeah. I mean, if you take, like, say, for example, Our Lady of Guadalupe or things of that nature, which I guess the church tradition for those are just that they're historicity of supernatural events pertaining to them, as opposed to them being
Okay.
specifically
Do you
uh,
object to do you
witnesses to
object to
things that
me
are
lumping those
prescribed.
two things together? I see no meaningful distinction between what you're calling church tradition and testimony. Because to me, the church tradition is literally just testimony.
A testimony in the sense that it is a group of human beings espousing information over the course of generations.
Yes.
Okay. If that's
Okay.
how you understand testimony, then sure. I was referring to testimony as being specifically a person's quoted line.
Oh, well, that's eyewitness testimony. That would be sorry. That's also a subset of testimony. But we can stick with that.
Okay. Well, in
Are
that
you
case, I would say eyewitness testimony is distinct from church tradition.
okay? That fair enough. I wouldn't have. I would agree with you on that. Are you when someone makes a testimonial claim? Are you? Would you agree that some percentage of testimony are people lying? Just in general, not in
Yes,
terms of the church,
absolutely.
just in general. Okay. So some non 0% of people are lying. And would you agree that there's some non 0% of people who are sincerely mistaken about what they're saying? So they're saying what they truly believe, but it's not, in fact, accurate.
Yeah, I do think that as well.
Okay. And then there would be a third category of potentially there are some people who are giving me supernatural claims, and I'm talking specifically with supernatural here, supernatural claims that are valid and real. And if I lived in your universe, there would be some percentage of people who are giving testimony about a valid, real supernatural thing. So there's at least three categories
Yeah,
of testimony, right?
sure.
Even in your world, if you had to put those in a pie chart, would the sliver I assume the slivers of pie would be largest for people who are lying and people who are mistaken versus the people who are genuinely describing a real vertical miracle.
Now, were you in my universe, I would think that the one for lying would be smaller than the one for the people who are genuinely mistaken.
So
But I think you
yeah,
are
sorry,
correct in the sense that
I phrased that poorly. Well said. I more meant to say that those two, however you might organize those two, that whatever size of pie those are, they're both at least larger than the ones who are giving true stories of real miracles.
sure. And I mean, I would obviously have no way to immediately verify those because it's not like you can scientifically test a miracle.
Okay. So then why do you base your convictions upon testimony when that is the smallest piece of the pie?
Well, because, okay, so I will take your question and I will yoink it and twist it only slightly in order to make it fit more with my universe as you were describing it before. I
Fair enough.
hold reverence generally to church tradition because I particularly think that it is useful, which is something you didn't want to talk about. Not that you didn't want to talk about it, just that it wasn't something you were particularly willing to engage in because it's not the topic that you were interested in. I didn't mean to imply that you were like disinterested in the idea that
Oh, no, no,
religion
no,
is
fair
useful.
enough. And I
But
understand that's my own proclivity. So
yeah,
carry on.
Well, and for me, I'm
right.
gonna
I was
just
just saying that.
double down on that and say for me, whether something is useful or not doesn't explain if it's true or not. So that's why I want to stay away from that side of the conversation.
Okay, I find that interesting though. Like you would probably agree. I mean, this is maybe just a question of definitions of what you believe reality is, but you would probably agree that like mathematics are real.
Well,
Are real in what sense?
yeah.
Exactly. This is where we're getting into like a specific definition fight that I don't necessarily want to get into. But like the idea that the concept can exist because it is pragmatically useful isn't necessarily unreasonable.
Well, I would never deduce that something's real because math says it's real. Like that's weird.
No, I meant to say that like the concept of math in general, like the disambiguation of mathematics as a tool for humanity to use in order to help discuss the universe.
But that's not that's a tool, not an entity. So if you're telling me that an entity, that a God exists, that's very different than claiming that mathematics are useful. Those are not a good
I don't
comparison.
necessarily think that it's helpful to view God as an entity in particular. I mean, after all, if you believe in church doctrine, then you wouldn't even believe that it
Maybe
is an
we need
individual entity.
so maybe we need you to define exactly what a God is. And I don't want to steer away from where Paul was going with this because I think he had a question
No,
there that you
sure.
were
And I
about to
will
answer.
get
And
that.
I'm sorry I
I
took
did
that
not
off track.
forget that
But
Paul was specifically asking me. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. There's
oh,
some
you're
of this
good.
delay
There's a
on my side
delay.
of the line. Am I okay to go?
Go ahead.
Thank you so much. So, just to get out of the definition fight, I understand an entity to be something that exists within the universe. That's the reason why I was originally saying that it wasn't necessarily helpful to describe God that way. Now, to get back to Paul's question, which is specifically why do I base my reality, my universe off of testimony? Well, I don't base it off of any old testimony. I base it off of church tradition and eyewitness testimony. And I believe that those are significantly higher in the pie chart of being likely to be based off of reality, people who are earnestly not mistaken, than
Well,
any other alternative.
hold on. Why you think that the pie chart is different for eyewitness testimony?
I think the pie chart is different for religious Christian testimony.
So you're special pleading this?
It isn't a special pleading as much as I understand where you're coming from, but this is me talking about the fact that this is something that was, as far as I'm aware, testable at the time.
What? How? I
I mean, you are
and
aware as well as I
hold
am
on.
that
Actually,
Jesus was a
well,
real
let me just
historical
back.
person.
Yeah, I'm gonna retract that question because you there for a second. What? Sorry, I got flustered there. Carry on with what you were saying. I'm. It doesn't seem like.
Yeah, the,
Go ahead. Promise. Save me
that
here.
yeah. How do you know that?
Okay. So if we're going to get into the question of what I can know versus not, then we're going to get into another definition fight. I believe it's more useful to talk about what I can pragmatically trust,
You
because
were.
none of
I
you can
don't.
know anything either, as far as I'm aware.
Are you saying that you think a God claim is unfalsifiable?
I mean, if you go off of a certain definition, everything is unjustifiable. I think it's more useful to
Unfalsifiable,
talk about what is most likely.
not justified,
Unjustifiable, correct.
unfalsifiable.
I think you can falsify a
I don't.
God personally, but I was talking about it being more useful to believe, and since we're not talking about that, then more probable to believe.
Do you
So let.
care if what you believe is true or not?
Yeah, absolutely. I care if what I believe is
Yeah,
true.
then let's stick to that. The usefulness shouldn't impact whether it's real or not, because you and I could both find it different levels of useful or useless, and that thing is either real or not, regardless of our subjective perspectives of the usefulness of it. So that's why I still
Do
want
you
to
believe that
continue to
usefulness as a
that's not going to be
concept can be
helpful.
subjective, Promise?
That usefulness can be subjective, yes, because it depends on what we're basing the concept or if I think if my
Depends on the
goal in
goal.
life is to eradicate all humanity, then obviously I'm going to see different things as useful or useless, versus if my goal is to see everybody as happy and healthy and having well-being. We're going to have different levels. So yes, it is subjective.
I think getting into
Sorry,
another
Paul, you were about
question
to
of
ask a
definitions
question.
again, because when I was imagining useful, I was imagining things that could be used as opposed to things that were specifically used for a purpose. Like I would say a hammer is a very useful tool, even if I don't have any arms and I couldn't necessarily hold it myself. It is still an objectively useful tool.
Right, and I need
I
you to
would.
show me that the hammer exists in order to use as a tool.
The reason you
Right.
believe
And the
is
reason why I
testimony.
was specifically saying that
Let's
it was
wind ourselves
useful and
back
that
to
was
the.
why I was more likely to be real.
Let's wind ourselves back to the testimony. So you're in first
Oh,
century
sure.
Judea. You're in first century Judea. Someone walks up to you and says, "I saw a risen Jesus," and you think the pie chart is different for that person. That you think it's still more likely, somehow more likely that they were accurately assessing an actual genuine miracle versus they're lying or they're mistaken. Am I correct in that? That's
Yeah.
the
I mean, compared to
scoring you're
certain other
giving.
religions, that feels like it's pretty dead to right.
Why would I care? I think all religions are false.
Yes,
So.
absolutely. And I didn't mean to imply that you were religious. I just meant to say that, like, if I was a first century Judean individual,
Mhm.
and I was looking at the other competition of other religions that might exist at the time, I would be less inclined to believe in somebody like Zoroaster, as if there was a guy who was
No,
literally saying, "I
that's
am the
not.
truth and the way" in real life.
I'm asking whether that person who's giving you that testimony is still somehow exempt from being mistaken or lying. What makes that person all of a sudden have a whole different scoring system than every other person in history?
I would say they have a different scoring system to every person in history, but I would say that the fact that they are in an area where they could potentially verify something of that nature would make them more
Well,
trustworthy than others who are trying to make
yeah,
similar
this is
claims.
now I know where I got lost and I'm back to it. So, but now you're adding things to testimony. Now you're saying I'm
Like what?
not taking that person at their word anymore. Now I'm going and fact checking. So that is no longer accepting based on testimony.
Oh,
That's
I see what
accepting
you're
based on
saying. That's an
testimony and
interesting
fact
perspective.
checking. So, but you
I
said you
specifically
accept
chose
this
to
stuff,
say that line because I was the first century Judean in the hypothetical.
but fair enough. But that's why I used it as the hypothetical, because then that first second century person isn't accepting it based on testimony. They're accepting it in your world based on testimony and fact checking. So there's two things going on.
This is true, but just
But
to be sure, you're talking about first person testimony, like eyewitness testimony, where I'm talking about testimony, which was your nebulous umbrella term that was originally what church tradition was.
I'm just saying that people are wrong and lying in all of these categories. And as far as I can tell, huge alarming rates that people are wrong and lying. And then there's this sliver. Then you want to carve out, for some reason, a handful of people in the first century who now their likelihood of being wrong and lying are for some reason different than all other humans. And also, you're telling me that that's not special pleading.
I'm telling you that it's not special pleading because this is something that can be verified. That was originally my point. Okay.
But no, but
Since
then it's not.
since you
No, we're
gave me the
talking about
hypothetical, I think it's only fair that I give you one, right?
Hey, Richard, I'm going
no,
to slow
no,
you down
no.
for a second. If you can talk a little bit slower and then give us time to finish our sentences, and then we'll continue to give you plenty of time to talk as we've been doing.
What we're
That's
talking
completely
about,
fair, and I'm
Richard.
sorry about that. I'm just very
What we're
nervous.
talking about,
I'm a big
Richard,
fan of
is
Paul.
whether testimony is a good epistemological grounding for a belief. That's all we're talking about here.
Yeah, you're right, Richie. Right. I'm just trying to make the case specifically that this person's testimony, while not being special pleading, is genuinely more helpful to believe or more likely to believe, like in a probabilistic, than other testimonies of equivalent reverence.
Why?
Because at the time, those people would at least
No,
have
no, no.
some basis for those
So
claims
okay,
that
so
was
then it's
not
not.
in supernature.
So then you're telling me that the epistemology of testimony wasn't good enough because they added in fact checking.
Again, I think we're just getting into a definition fight over testimony specifically because I was using your term of testimony, which was church tradition being inseparable from testimony.
You were telling us that we should believe based on testimony, right?
Yeah,
Right. Church tradition and
let me throw
testimony.
a
That's
wrench in
correct.
here real quick, Richard. You're not going to be able to convince me to care about testimony from your religious texts or from any other religion's claims that they have. I have my reasons where those I need evidence here and now. I need to know why right now I should believe a God exists. We don't even have to get to which one yet. So I'm really curious if you have evidence of that for me, or if you're just saying like these stories and these people said these things and I believe them and I think you should too. In which case, I'm just gonna have to tell you, sorry, I don't believe you. Let's chat again another time,
Do
I
you
guess.
believe
So my
historical
question
evidence is
for you,
evidence, Thomas?
my question for you is right now, does a God exist?
I would obviously say yes. And I would say
Okay.
that one of the
So then my
easiest
question
signifiers of
is,
evidence
why
that
should
you
I
and I could
believe that?
verify, because you can check the historicity.
I don't need to check the historicity of gravity. I'm experiencing it right now.
But the evidence was originally found a long time ago. And you can
So
still
does that
test the
is there
effects of things
evidence
that happened a
today?
long time ago.
Is there any evidence that I can go out and figure out that scientists can go detect right now? Or do we have to take people's word from it from 2,000 years ago?
Well, this will be an entirely different conversation. It seems we've kind of finalized the concept of testimony in church tradition being useful
I
in
just
terms of,
asked a really
um,
clear question, Richard. I'm asking you, is there evidence that exists currently other than you saying, look at these, claims from 2,000 years ago? Is there evidence right now
I
that
understand what you're
a
saying.
God exists?
Right. I just want to clarify the reason why I said that in the first place. I swear I was just saying that because I wanted to not seem like I was just jumping from argument to argument. In this case, I would say if we're not talking about the historicity, which was what I first said, then we can talk about things like if you personally believe in special creation or how the world appears designed, appearance of design.
It doesn't appear to be designed to me at all.
That can absolutely be tested. Design doesn't seem clear to you, is what you said?
The universe does not appear to be designed to me. Why does it appear to be designed to you?
I would think that just the fact that Earth harbors life in the first place, as we understand the universe, is so statistically improbable that it implies that there was some cause to it as opposed to it being by chance.
Improbable based off of what? Here we are. Apparently, it's not that improbable because we're here.
Improbable based off of every other planet that we can see in the solar system, Thomas, or not even solar system, in the universe.
I, I,
If
I
we
guess you
compare
don't
Earth to
understand what I'm
every other
saying.
planet,
That, if anything, that gives more validity to what I'm saying, which is that this does seem to be kind of a fluke, and that's really cool. And here we are experiencing it. I don't see any signs of design.
I am just going to reiterate that the fact that we are in what we call a Goldilocks zone because it's helpful to understand. The fact that the Earth happens to be a planet that is hospitable to life and that we emerged in the first place by itself and by the nature of the fact that we particularly like existing would be, at minimum, an argument for God and an evidence for God, too.
I don't see that at all. I hear you saying, I think it's rare that we're here and I can't explain it and I need to explain it. So I'm going to say it's a God.
I think you would agree that problems generally demand an explanation.
You can demand it all day long. If we don't know, we don't know.
Right. We can talk about what we know versus don't know. I mean, do you know that you
That's
aren't a
what I'm
brain in a vat,
trying. That's
like
what
a Boltzmann
That's
brain?
what no, I don't know that. That's the whole thing. I don't know if this is a simulation. I don't know if this is part of a multiverse. I don't know. And I'm willing to say that. I'm willing to say we don't know. We don't know where if the
Right.
universe came from anything,
But
if it's always been here in some form. And I have zero reason to think there's an intelligent designer behind it. And I have a lot of reasons to think there isn't. Because I can think of like 25 things off the top of my head that seem really unintelligent. And if I was a designer and was all powerful, I would changed a lot of things just about how the human body works.
that you don't know why they are that way doesn't necessarily mean there isn't a logical explanation.
That's not
That's a
what we're
great
saying.
sentence. that's that's not saying that there isn't a logical explanation. There is. That's the whole thing. We can look at our bodies and see how they've evolved to be this way and why things have worked out. But there's no signs of efficiency or intelligence in the idea that my windpipe is right next to where I eat and people die from eating, which they have to do because this supposed intelligent designer made us to need food and water when he could have made us to not need that at all. Or maybe he could have made us to, I don't know, not have to shit. Like that would be really cool if I was trying to be a cool designer. That's one thing I would take out immediately. Also, I would get rid of, to your point, lifeless planets. Why? Not necessary. If you're an all powerful God, you don't need to do that. If I was going to take the time to make other planets, I'd make them really fucking cool. And I'd make it super easy for us to go to them. There's so many things that we can go on and on and on about. I don't see signs of
Well,
intelligent
that's a very
design.
different sense of perspective. Wouldn't you agree?
A very different what?
If you're thinking about arguing against a God who is the creator of everything, wouldn't you think that he would kind of be in the corner of everything as opposed to just whatever humans would personally want right now?
Sure, but you're appealing to our sense of things. You're appealing to our sense that there must be an obvious of designer. And the
Well,
fact that
hang on, Paul.
you
I think that's unfair to say because Promise was literally just appealing to my intuition that there must be something wrong with the human body.
no, when you make a design argument, you are appealing to intuition.
Correct.
Sure,
You
you
said
can
things
appeal to
appear
intuition. I
dishine.
don't think that's
Promise
inappropriate.
Promise went on and on to
Richard, you
say
got to let us finish our sentences.
I'm sorry, you're
Promise
right.
went on and on to say that for her, and she spoke for me there as well, things don't appear designed. So if you're saying the appearance of design should be evidence for us, we're trying to explain to you that our that's not our perspective.
Sure. I
So
guess what I was originally entering the conversation for, so we can capstone it here as far as I'm concerned, I was looking to offer like a dynamic conversation where, fundamentals of reality might be good enough to make an argument. But as I'm learning now, it seems like you guys have this almost ultimate skepticism to any idea that can be hypothetically explained logically.
Why shouldn't we have that skepticism? Why shouldn't we hold
I
out for
think
the
that
most
you should
logical
probably, oh, sorry.
conclusion? Why should we jump to magic?
I think that you should jump to the conclusion that best fits with the evidence, which is why I was originally
Why
going
should I jump to a
probabilistically.
conclusion instead of saying we don't know? Why should I be so arrogant to, without good reason, other than, well, I don't have another answer, say, I'll go with your answer then, when I don't see any good reason to go with that answer? And as I said, I see a lot of reasons to not go with that answer. Why shouldn't I hold out and just say, I don't know?
I think the reason that you shouldn't hold out is because, well, this is just going to go back to all the other reasons that there are reasons to believe that the church is a useful tool for historicity. Like, I think that we have a little bit of stripes on it. We have a little bit of notches on our belt in terms of lasting through criticism.
I
And these
understand that
criticisms
you
that you
think
guys
that
are
you do,
leveraging,
but I don't think that. I still don't see any good reason to believe that any gods exist. I don't take your religion any more seriously than I do Islam, which has also lasted a long time and spread really far.
that's true that Islam has lasted a long time. However, Islam has not lasted as long as Christianity.
So if there's so Zoroastrianism is still practiced that is older than both. So is that the criteria that we should use?
I think that you are simplifying things in a way that you know are not accurate.
I don't.
I
Like,
think that you're dodging all of our questions and you're coming back with other questions, and I don't think you're being an honest interlocutor throughout this entire conversation. I appreciate that you're being civil and polite, but I don't feel that you have truly answered some of the things we've come back to you with. And I think that when we've presented you with our very good reasons for not continuing to go off with whatever claim you've made, you go back to something else or you move on to something else. I
I
as you said, you wanted
specifically
to
said that I was
bookend,
trying
and
to
I
avoid
do.
doing that.
That's great that you were trying, I guess. I don't think it worked out that way. We do have to get to other theist callers. I think maybe it sounds like you have somebody else on the line with you coaching you. Maybe you guys go take this conversation and watch it back together. See if you can come up with a better argument. Call Forrest tonight, Forrest and John. They're
He
both
was there
great.
for
They're
my
really
emotional
patient.
support because I was very nervous to meet Paul.
Richie
Yeah,
Letterman.
fair enough. I'm very scary and intimidating. I get it. Richard, I would love
I'm
to
I'm
chat
so
with you
sorry.
again. Richard, I'd love to chat with you
Hi.
again about specifically call in and say that church history is valid history. If that was the conversation you want to have with me sometime, I would love to have that because as you know from watching my stuff, I reject all that, and you must have ideas for why I'm wrong. We can't get into them today, but I would love to have that
I
conversation
really
sometime.
appreciate your guys' time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for letting me be here as my friend's emotional support. I genuinely respect your guys' willingness to talk to him about this kind of thing.
yeah.
Okay,
We didn't know you were on the line, but sure. We'll talk
Oh,
to you again
sorry.
sometime,
Hi. I've
Richard.
been here the whole time.
I figured.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we're figuring that out now. All right. Thanks, guys.
Sorry. Thank you.
we have emotional support producers that we have in our ears.
We do. We have the voice of God that happens.